Chinese civilization is one of the oldest on Earth, stretching back thousands of years without ever fully breaking. It began with farmers pressing millet seeds into the yellow soil beside a great muddy river. It would grow into the most populous society the ancient world had ever known. Along the way, priests cracked bones in fire to hear the whispers of the dead. One king reportedly built a lake filled entirely with wine and made thousands drink from it like cattle. Another emperor supposedly kept 2 dragons and served one, cooked, at his royal table. Victorious armies once dragged tens of thousands of captives home to be sacrificed to the gods. A single ruler unified the warring lands and crowned himself the first emperor of all China. He buried an entire clay army to guard him, and it stayed hidden for over 2,000 years. He linked ancient ramparts into a wall that snaked across mountains and deserts alike. Later, this land gave the world printing, gunpowder, and the magnetic compass, and it endured the bloodiest civil war in all of human history, costing over 20 million lives. This is the entire history of ancient China, from mud huts to the last empire. So let us begin at the very beginning, thousands of years before the first king was ever crowned. Around 9,000 years ago, the first villages rose along the Yellow and Yangtze rivers. The Peilagang people were among the earliest, grinding grain on smooth stone slabs. In the north, they farmed millet, while in the wetter south, they flooded fields to grow rice. They kept pigs and dogs, and shaped the wet clay of the riverbanks into pottery. The Yangshao culture painted their pots with swirling fish, faces, and bold red spirals. Their villages clustered around a large central house, ringed by protective ditches. But their strangest custom came only after death, in a ritual called secondary burial. They buried the dead once, then waited for the flesh to rot away in the earth. Later they dug the bodies up again, carefully cleaned the bare bones, and reburied them. Whole communities were placed together in vast shared graves, holding many people at once. Over time, some graves grew richer than others, hinting at the first chiefs and rulers. Polished jade began to mark the powerful, worn as blades and discs against the skin. These simple farmers, quietly, were laying the foundations of a civilization. Around 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, a new culture rose called the Longshan. They mastered the fast potter's wheel, spinning clay so thin it was called eggshell pottery. Their signature vessels were jet black, tall and polished until they shone like lacquer. But their greatest feat was defensive, for the Longshan learned to build enormous walls. They pounded layer after layer of soil between wooden frames into rock-hard, rammed earth. Some of these walls stretched over a mile around, encircling entire towns. Such walls meant one thing clearly: these people now had enemies worth fearing. Archaeologists find skulls split by axes and bodies flung into wells and ditches. Warfare was reshaping society, and warriors and chiefs rose above the common farmers. Rare bronze and gold began to appear, hoarded by the emerging elite. Towns traded, fought, and swallowed one another, growing into the first proto-states. From this violent, ambitious world, legend says China's very first dynasty was born, and its founder, they say, was a man who tamed a flood that nearly drowned the world. The first dynasty, tradition holds, was the Xia, though historians still debate if it truly existed. Its story begins with a catastrophe, a flood that swallowed the fields for many years. A hero named Yu was given the impossible task of taming the raging waters. Instead of blocking the rivers, Yu dug great channels to guide the water safely to the sea. Legends say he labored for 13 years and never once returned home to rest. For this superhuman feat, he was made king and founded the Xia dynasty. Crucially, Yu passed his throne to his son, beginning the idea of hereditary rule. The Xia are said to have cast bronze and built palaces of timber and pounded earth. Their tales grow stranger with each generation, none stranger than King Kongjia. The chronicles claim he was given a pair of dragons, one male and one female. When the female dragon died, it was quietly cooked and served up at the royal table. The king reportedly enjoyed the dish so much that he demanded to be served more. But the Xia line would end in cruelty, under a tyrant remembered with pure horror. The last Xia king was named Jai, and the histories paint him as a monster. He was said to possess strength, so vast it barely seemed human. Legend claims he could tear apart rhinoceroses and tigers with his bare hands, but he used his power not to rule wisely, only to feed his endless appetites. His most infamous act was ordering an entire lake to be filled with wine. Around this lake, he threw feasts of unimaginable, wasteful excess. At the beat of a drum, 3,000 people would lean down and drink from it like cattle. While he reveled, his people starved, taxed to ruin to pay for his pleasures. The chronicles say the people cried out, cursing him and longing for his fall. A rival lord named Tang rose from the east, gathering the discontented to his banner. Tang's army crushed the tyrant, and Jai fled into exile, where he died in disgrace. So fell the Xia, and Tang founded a new dynasty called the Shang. With the Shang, China steps out of legend and into the light of written history. The Shang dynasty ruled the Yellow River heartland for around 6 centuries. Here we find China's first true writing, carved by priests seeking answers from the dead. Diviners heated ox, shoulder blades, and turtle shells until they cracked in the fire. They read the pattern of cracks as messages from royal ancestors and gods. Questions about harvests, war, and childbirth were then inscribed beside the cracks. These oracle bones are the oldest surviving Chinese writing ever found. The Shang were also master metalworkers, casting bronze of astonishing beauty. They used a piece mold method, assembling vessels from many carved clay sections. The result was enormous ritual cauldrons covered in monstrous animal faces. These vessels held offerings of food and wine for the honored ancestors. In war, Shang nobles rode into battle on fast, 2-wheeled horse-drawn chariots. Their capital at Anyang held grand palaces, workshops, and deep royal tombs. But beneath that splendor lay a darkness measured in human lives. For the Shang, the dead were not gone. They were powerful and demanded to be fed. And what the ancestors craved most, the kings believed, was human blood. When Shang armies won a battle, they marched their prisoners home for slaughter. The oracle bones record as many as 30,000 captives sacrificed over time. Victims were beheaded in ceremonies meant to please the hungry royal ancestors. Their bodies were buried in neat rows within the sacred grounds of the capital. The horror did not end with enemies, for royal death demanded company too. When a king died, servants, guards, and concubines were buried alongside him. Many were placed there alive, to keep serving their master in the world beyond. Beside them lay chariots, horses, and dogs, all killed to accompany the king. Their tombs overflowed with bronze, jade, and gold for the afterlife. It was a religion of terror, binding the living to the will of the dead. Yet even the Shang, drunk on power, would lose the favor of heaven itself. To the west lived the Zhou, a rising people who watched the Shang grow corrupt. Their last Shang enemy was a cruel king lost in wine and casual cruelty. The Zhou leader Wu gathered an army and marched against the Shang capital. At the Battle of Mui, the Shang soldiers turned and abandoned their tyrant. The Shang king fled to his palace and burned himself alive amid his treasures. To explain their victory, the Zhou proclaimed a powerful new idea. They called it the mandate of heaven, the divine right to rule. Heaven, they said, granted power only to just and virtuous rulers. If a king grew cruel, heaven would strip his mandate and hand it to another. This idea would justify every rise and fall of dynasties for thousands of years. To govern their huge new realm, the Zhou parceled land out to loyal nobles. Each lord ruled his region and owed the king's soldiers tribute and loyalty. For 2 centuries it worked, until distance and ambition began to pull it apart. In time, nomadic raiders from the west stormed the Zhou capital and killed the king. The survivors fled east and rebuilt their court in a smaller, weaker capital. From then on, the Zhou kings reigned in name, but no longer truly ruled. Real power passed to the regional lords, who now schemed and warred among themselves. Historians call this the Spring and Autumn period, an age of restless rivalry. The strongest lords became overlords, forcing weaker states to bow before them. Iron tools spread, cities swelled, and trade routes threaded across the land. Yet amid this turmoil, Something extraordinary was stirring in people's minds. Thinkers wandered from state to state, offering rulers their answers to the chaos. How should a good society be ordered? How should a wise king rule? Their debates exploded into what became known as the 100 Schools of Thought. It was China's intellectual golden age, blooming from the wreckage of order. And 3 of these schools would shape Chinese civilization forever. The first great thinker was Confucius, a teacher troubled by his broken age. He taught that society thrives when everyone honors their proper role and elders. Rulers, he said, should lead by virtue and example, not by fear. His ideas on family, duty and respect would guide China for over 2,000 years. A very different path was offered by the followers of Taoism. They urged people to stop struggling and flow with the natural way of things. Their sage Laozi taught that the softest water can wear away the hardest stone. The third school, legalism, took a far harsher view of humankind. It held that people are selfish and obey only strict laws and heavy punishment. Legalists wanted an all-powerful state with total control over its people. Confucianism preached virtue. Taoism preached harmony. Legalism preached control. These philosophies would clash and blend for the rest of Chinese history. But first, one brutal state would test legalism on a scale never seen before. The rivalry only deepened until it erupted into total war. 7 mighty states now fought for absolute mastery over all of China. This brutal age is called the Warring States period, lasting some 2.5 centuries. Warfare transformed completely, growing vastly larger and more deadly. The old noble chariots faded, replaced by huge armies of common foot soldiers. Iron weapons spread everywhere, cheaper and stronger than the old bronze. The most feared weapon was the crossbow, deadly even in untrained hands. A wall of crossbow bolts could shatter an enemy charge before it ever arrived. States raised armies of hundreds of thousands, feeding them from vast granaries. Generals wrote treatises on strategy that are still studied by armies today. Among these states, one grew coldest, harshest, and most disciplined of all. The state of Qin embraced legalism and forged itself into a war machine. And a young, ruthless king of Qin now set his eyes on conquering everything. His name was Zheng, and he became king of Qin while still just a boy. As he grew, he unleashed his armies against the other 6 great states. One by one, over just 10 furious years, the rival kingdoms fell. By around 221, before the Common Era, no rival remained. For the first time, all the warring lands answered to a single ruler. Zheng declared that the old title of king was no longer grand enough. He crowned himself Qin Shi Huang, the very first emperor of China. He believed his dynasty would last 10,000 generations. To rule it, he swept away the old nobles and their inherited lands. He divided the empire into provinces run by appointed, loyal officials. Every command flowed from the emperor down through a vast, obedient bureaucracy. It was legalism made real, a centralized state of terrifying efficiency and control. And now the emperor turned his boundless will toward reshaping the world itself. The first emperor demanded that his empire become uniform in every way. He standardized the money, so one round bronze coin was used across all the land. He fixed the writing, so a single script could be read from coast to frontier. He even set the width between cart wheels, so every road fitted every wagon. He built great straight roads radiating out from the capital across the empire. To guard the north, he linked older ramparts into one immense wall. Hundreds of thousands of laborers toiled and died raising these defenses. This early wall was the distant ancestor of the Great Wall famous today. But the emperor ruled through fear, crushing all who dared to question him. Obsessed with living forever, he swallowed elixirs laced with poison. He died on a journey, and his death was hidden with carts of rotting fish. Within a few short years, revolts shattered his supposedly eternal dynasty. Yet beneath the earth, his greatest secret would sleep undisturbed for ages. Even in life, the first emperor was building his home for eternity. He commanded a tomb so vast, it was like an entire hidden city. Ancient accounts claim it held rivers of mercury flowing beneath a jeweled sky. To guard him forever, he ordered an entire army made of clay. Thousands of life-sized soldiers were sculpted, each with a unique face. There were archers, infantry, officers, horses and chariots, all in formation. Once they were painted in bright colors and armed with real bronze weapons. The whole army was buried in deep pits, hidden completely underground. Astonishingly, nothing above ground marked this enormous secret. For over 2,000 years, the clay army stood silent in the dark. Then, in 1974, farmers digging a well struck something hard. They had stumbled upon one of the greatest discoveries in all history. The first emperor's silent guardians had finally been found. From the ashes of the Qin rose a peasant-born rebel named Liu Bang. He defeated his rivals and founded the mighty Han dynasty. The Han would rule for 4 centuries and shape China's very identity. They kept the Qin's strong administration, but softened its cruel harshness. Confucian scholars filled the government, chosen for their learning. The empire expanded far to the north, south, and deep into the west. Its population swelled to nearly 60 million people. Traders opened the Silk Road, carrying goods across the deserts to distant lands. Chinese silk traveled so far it reached the markets of Rome itself. Han inventors even created paper, a gift that would change the whole world. This was a true golden age of prosperity, learning, and invention. The Han grew so central that Chinese people still call themselves Han today. But no golden age lasts forever, and rot was already spreading in the court. As the Han aged, real power drained away from the emperors themselves. Powerful court eunuchs and scheming relatives fought to control the throne. The scholar officials despised the eunuchs and plotted to destroy them. In one famous plot, elites schemed to massacre hundreds of court eunuchs, but the plan collapsed in disaster, and the eunuchs struck back first. 2 of the leading plotters killed themselves in shame and defeat. Their severed heads were then put on public display as a warning. While the elite tore itself apart, the common people were suffering terribly. Famine, floods, and heavy taxes pushed the peasants to breaking point. They rose in a huge uprising, wrapping yellow cloth around their heads. This yellow turban revolt shook the empire to its very foundations. To crush it, the court handed armies to ambitious regional warlords, and once those warlords had the swords, they no longer needed the emperor. The mighty Han dynasty finally shattered under the weight of its warlords. After 4 centuries, unified imperial rule came crashing to an end. The land split into 3 rival kingdoms, each led by an ambitious lord. In the north stood the powerful and cunning kingdom of Wei. In the southwest rose the kingdom of Shu, guarded by rugged mountains, and along the great river spread the wealthy kingdom of Wu. The 3 kingdoms fought, allied, and betrayed one another for decades. Their generals and strategists became legends told for centuries after. Great battles raged on rivers, where fire ships turned water into an inferno. This turbulent age inspired some of China's most beloved stories. Eventually, the North conquered the others and briefly reunited the land. But lasting unity remained fragile, and division would return again and again. Yet centuries later, China would blaze brighter than any land on earth. Centuries on, the Song dynasty ushered in a dazzling age of invention. Its cities grew vast, some holding over 1 million bustling people. A booming economy filled the markets with goods, paper money, and trade. Song craftsmen invented movable type, printing books faster than ever before. They harnessed gunpowder, hurling fire and explosions at their enemies, and they perfected the magnetic compass, guiding ships across open seas. Together, these inventions would eventually transform the entire world. It was during the Song that much of classic Chinese culture truly emerged. The famous upturned corners of Chinese roofs first became widespread here. Rice replaced wheat as the staple, and tea replaced wine at the table. The painful custom of foot binding also began to spread in this era. In wealth, science, and art, no society on earth then matched the Song. But China's imperial story would end with its largest empire of all. China's final dynasty, the Qing, rose to rule the largest empire in its history. It expanded across deserts, mountains, and grasslands to its greatest ever size. Under its long peace, the population exploded to over 400 million. But such enormous numbers strained the land beyond what it could feed. Hunger and hardship stirred rage, and one bitter man would ignite it. Hong Xiuquan had failed the civil service, exams 4 humiliating times. Feverish and broken, he came to believe he was the younger brother of a savior. He gathered millions of followers and launched a vast, holy rebellion. This Taiping rebellion became the bloodiest civil war in human history. Before it ended, more than 20 million people had perished. Battered by rebellion and defeated by foreign powers, the king crumbled. In the early 20th century, the last emperor gave up the throne forever. Thousands of years of dynasties had finally come to an end. But its inventions, ideas, and culture still shape our entire world today.